All right, so are you ready to jump into this? We're taking a look at America through two different lenses today.
Two very different points in time.
Exactly. We've got this 1980 interview with Donald Trump, a young Donald Trump. He's 34 at the time.
Mm.
And then we're going to look at this article from 2025, so almost 45 years apart.
Yeah.
And the 2025 article, it digs into race and opportunity in America during a hypothetical second term of Trump's presidency.
Right. Very different topics, but I think we can tie them together and see what's changed, what stayed the same about America's challenges and opportunities.
For sure. And that's what this deep dive is all about, right? It's about connecting those dots between the past and the present, maybe even get a glimpse into the future.
Absolutely. So where do you want to start?
Well, let's rewind the clock back to 1980. I mean, picture this. This goes fading out. The Cold War is going strong.
Big hair.
Big hair, yeah. And you've got this up-and-coming real estate developer, Donald Trump, making waves in New York City.
Right. Already making headlines.
Exactly. And he sits down for this interview, and you can just feel the ambition just radiating off of him even then.
Yeah, even then, this interview is a real time capsule. It captures that feeling of, the Iran hostage crisis is going on. And
Yeah.
there's this real sense of frustration, I think, in America at the time.
Yeah, like America's not living up to its potential.
Exactly. And Trump really taps into that sentiment.
Yeah, he uses some strong language, too, talking about how America's being, kicked around and treated like a doormat.
That strongman kind of rhetoric, you can see it starting to emerge there.
It's definitely there. And, even back then, the themes of strength and respect being really important for America, it's all over this interview.
And his argument, it really comes down to this idea that America's not respected on the world stage.
Yeah.
Because it's not projecting enough strength.
He even uses the Iran hostage crisis as an example. Like, he says military intervention would have been the right move.
Right, showing those other countries that America means business.
And he connects the whole Iran-Iraq war to America's perceived weakness, saying that other countries are taking advantage of the situation.
It's a very, America first kind of perspective.
Yeah, he even says that America could be oil rich if they intervene in Iran.
Interesting. It's like a very transactional view of foreign policy almost. Like if we project strength, then we get respect, and then we reap these economic benefits.
Yeah, you can definitely see how that line of thinking would play a role in his approach to leadership later on.
For sure.
But, there is this one kind of awkward moment in the interview when the interviewer asks Trump directly if he personally would have gone to war in Iran.
And what does he say?
Well, his response is not exactly a clear yes or no. It's kind of this hesitant, maybe.
So even then, there's that little bit of hesitation. Like, it's one thing to talk about military action and another to actually imagine yourself, sending troops into harm's way.
Exactly. It's almost like he's thinking it through in real time. So that's 1980.
Right.
A glimpse into a young Donald Trump and his vision for America. Now, let's fast forward to 2025.
All right, let's do it.
We've got this article, and the title is Real Talk About Race and Opportunity in Trump's Second Presidential Term, Why It Matters.
Okay, so hypothetical second term.
Yeah, exactly. It's imagining, what if Trump had a second term as president, and it really digs deep into these issues of race and politics in America.
Makes sense, given, the context of, recent history.
And it starts by laying out this historical context. It talks about slavery, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement.
Right, it's like a crash course in, the long struggle for racial equality in America.
And it makes the point that the struggle is far from over, even in 2025.
Right.
And then it connects this historical backdrop to, Trump's first term in office.
Okay, so how does it do that?
Well, it looks at specific policies, immigration, criminal justice, the economy, and it examines, how those policies impacted different racial groups.
Interesting. So not just like a list of policies, but like how they actually played out in people's lives.
Exactly. It's about the real world impact.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it goes beyond just the policies themselves. It also digs into the power of language and representation. It argues that the way we talk about race can really shape public perception, and ultimately that has an effect on opportunity.
That's so true. Like, words matter.
Words absolutely matter. And then there's this whole section on economic disparities in the article.
Oh, that's so important.
It is. And they present all these statistics about, things like education and access to resources. And it really paints a picture of how these inequalities persist along racial lines.
Right. Like how race and economics are so intertwined.
Exactly. And, even though the article presents these pretty, stark realities, it doesn't just stop at the problems.
Okay, so it offers some solutions.
Yeah, it does. It calls for this multifaceted approach, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to these really complex issues.
Makes sense.
So one of the things they talk about is inclusive policymaking.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, basically, it means making sure that the voices of marginalized communities are actually heard and considered when policies are being created.
Right, not just, decisions being made by people who haven't lived those experiences.
Exactly. It's about bringing those voices to the table.
I like that.
And they make this really strong case for education as a key driver of change.
Education is always key, right?
It is, but they're not just talking about any education. They're specifically talking about the need for more resources allocated to underserved communities.
Okay, so like making sure schools in those communities have the funding they need.
Exactly. And they also talk about the need for teaching practices that are culturally responsive.
So it's not just about the money, it's about how we're teaching too.
Right. It's about recognizing that different communities may have different needs and approaches to learning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And then the article goes a step further and it starts talking about the power of grassroots movements as catalysts for change.
Like community organizing and activism.
Exactly. They argue that the people who are closest to these challenges, the people who are living these experiences every day, those are the people who are best positioned to understand the solutions and advocate for change.
It's a bottom-up approach.
Exactly. It's about empowering communities to drive change from the ground up.
Powerful stuff.
So we have these two snapshots, right? This young, ambitious Trump in 1980 focused on, strength and respect on the world stage. And then this 2025 analysis grappling with the nuances of race and opportunity in America.
And I guess the question is, do those two visions for America align at all?
Yeah, like, are they compatible or are they fundamentally at odds with each other?
That's the big question, right? Like, does focusing on projecting strength outward come at the cost of addressing those inequalities that exist within our own society?
Or can those two goals coexist?
Lots to unpack there for sure.
Yeah.
It's almost like two different leadership styles too, right? You've got that assertive kind of top-down approach in the 1980 interview, and then this 2025 article, it really emphasizes the power of, communities and grassroots movements.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just about, the president or the government dictating solutions. It's about empowering people to make change happen from within their own communities.
Exactly. And the article really highlights that idea of shared power.
Yeah.
It's not just about protests and marches. It's about people coming together to share their stories, to educate each other, to build empathy.
Yeah, and it gives some really powerful examples like community meetings where people can directly voice their concerns to those in power, or workshops focused on, education and empowerment, even things like theater and art as a way to amplify those voices.
That's awesome. Using art as a tool for social change.
Exactly. And it's about, recognizing that everyone has a role to play in this fight for racial justice.
And that it's not just about raising awareness, it's about pushing for real, concrete changes in policy.
Absolutely. The article talks about this idea of using a racial equity lens when developing policies.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, it's basically asking tough questions like who benefits from this policy, who might be left behind. Are we perpetuating existing inequalities, or are we genuinely creating more opportunities for everyone?
So it's like a way to make sure that policies are actually promoting equity.
Exactly. It's about being intentional and thoughtful about how policies are designed and implemented.
I like that a lot.
And it goes beyond just analyzing data. The article stresses the importance of actually involving communities in the policymaking process.
Like actually talking to the people who will be affected by these policies.
Exactly. Bringing them to the table, listening to their experiences, understanding the challenges they face.
That makes so much sense.
It's about recognizing that lived experience is valuable knowledge,
And then you have this idea of resource allocation, right? Like making sure that resources are being directed to the communities that need them the most.
Right. The article talks about investing in education, healthcare economic development in marginalized communities, supporting minority-owned businesses, creating job training programs that are tailored to specific community needs.
It's about recognizing that true equality doesn't just happen, it requires real effort and investment.
Exactly. And it has to be strategic and targeted.
For sure.
And this part really struck me. The article emphasizes the need for transparency and accountability.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's not enough to just implement policies. We need to be tracking their impact, measuring their effectiveness, and being willing to adjust course if something isn't working.
So it's like a constant feedback loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are these policies actually making a difference? Are they achieving their goals?
Exactly. It's about being honest about what's working and what's not, and being willing to make make changes as needed.
Makes sense.
So here we are, we've explored these two very different perspectives on America. One from the past, a young Donald Trump focused on, strength and respect on the world stage, and one from a potential future grappling with these really complex issues of race and opportunity.
It's fascinating to see how those two visions intersect or maybe don't intersect.
Right. It forces us to think about what kind of America we're building,
Yeah.
what values we prioritize and how we turn those values into action.
And who gets to be a part of that conversation, right? Like, who has a seat at the table when decisions are being made?
Absolutely. And I think that's something that the 2025 article really brings to light, the importance of making sure that everyone's voice is heard.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we all have a stake in creating a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. And that this conversation about what it means to be American, it's as relevant today as it was back in 1980.
Maybe even more so.
Maybe even more so.
And it really makes you think, like after hearing both of these, these perspectives from such different times, what stands out to you?
I think for me, it's that question of, are we making progress? Are we tackling the same problems just in different forms?
Right. Are we actually getting closer to that, that ideal of a just and equitable society, or are we kind of going in circles?
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, too, if you could go back and talk to those folks in 1980 or, those authors in 2025, what would you ask them?
Oh, man, that's a good one.
Right. Like, imagine you could sit down with young Donald Trump, the one from that interview.
Yeah, the up-and-coming real estate guy.
Exactly. And what would you ask him, knowing what we know now?
I think I'd want to ask him how he sees those two things connecting, that focus on strength and that focus on equality.
Like, can you really have one without the other?
Exactly. Or do they somehow work together?
Or maybe they're just fundamentally at odds.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And then, you think about those authors in 2025, the ones writing about race and opportunity.
Yeah. What would you ask them?
I'd be curious to know, what concrete steps they would recommend.
To actually make those changes happen.
Exactly. Like, how do we move beyond just talking about these issues and actually start making a difference?
It's like they lay out this vision, but what's the roadmap? How do we get there?
Right. It's one thing to say we need more equitable policies, but how do we actually make that happen?
Yeah, how do we get those policies implemented, and how do we make sure they're actually effective?
It's a big challenge for sure.
It is, but I think it's a challenge worth taking on.
Absolutely. And I think, even though we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore.
But hopefully this has given our listeners, some food for thought, some things to mull over.
Yeah, and maybe even some inspiration to keep digging into these issues, on their own.
Exactly, because ultimately it's up to all of us to keep these conversations going, to keep pushing for change, to keep working towards a better future.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.